Welcome to The Last American Vagabond. I am honored to be joined today by David Icke, who needs no introduction. And we're going to be discussing some really important topics that have really always been important. The manipulation of media, the false concept of people pretending to be other things. And we're going to talk about something that he's really coined, a term called the MAMs, or mainstream alternative media, and why this is so important to the general conversation about anything today, but in particular, the political dynamics and how people are being manipulated through this under the perception that these people are in fact independent or just have honest intentions. But through that conversation, we're also going to talk about how this overlaps right now with a very prominent conversation around Israel and Gaza, but in fact, much deeper than just that one point. And something that I've really been interrogating a lot since October 7th, but long before that as well. And this is the concept of Zionism, the history of Zionism, the true nature of it, and how it overlaps with a lot of different things, and its dishonest overlap with Judaism. And I think this is something that is very contentious, and rightly so, because it's something that is it is being misrepresented by a lot of people dishonestly out there. And I think what's important to understand around this topic is how it's being used to manipulate, and why we should be able to talk about really anything, but this in particular, and how this is shielded by allegations of anti-Semitism and so on. So joining me today is David Icke to break all this down. Thank you, David, for joining me. I'm honored to have you on the show. How are you?
Real pleasure, mate. I'm good.
Well, I'm glad to have you on today because there's really nobody else I'd rather get into this conversation with, because, you know, you've been, as you say, often banned from 30 countries around the world for basically just talking about things that people are only just now finding the courage to be able to dive into. And I'm not sure exactly why that is, but I think my opinion is because of the belligerent response of Israel, which has caused people to just, you know, before people were willing to kind of overlook things and hide from it, but you can't ignore 15,000 dead children. And so people are having a really hard time ignoring all of this. And it's finally causing people to kind of poke into some of these conversations. So glad to have you on to talk about this. So let's go ahead. If you want to start with something there, go ahead.
I was just going to say that, you know, I said a long time ago that the time would come. This is when people were just, you know, what do you mean conspiracy? Rubbish. The time would come where it would have to break the surface and people could see it. Because if you're going from A to Z, the closer you get to Z, the more obvious it's going to be where you're going and what you're doing. And I think COVID was a big step. I said at the time, you know, this global cult, as I call it, has now walked into the room and it's heard the door click behind it. Now it's on public display, at least for more people than ever before. And I think the same applies to Israel. There have been endless apologists for Israel over the decades, and what they do, it's a very simple thing, is they equate everybody in the Jewish community worldwide with those that you're actually pointing out, those you're exposing. It's an old trick. Oh, you're anti-Semitic. Well, anti-Semitic. What's Semitic? It's a group of languages in the Middle East, overwhelmingly Arabic languages, ironically. But they've been using this term to silence people. They've certainly done it with me so often since actually 1995. It started 94, 95. It started with me. So that when you're pointing out the Rothschild manipulation, the psychopath that is Netanyahu and all these other people over the years, then you're saying that all Jews are doing that. Well, you're not saying that. You're saying they are. But because they've equated exposing those people with the entire Jewish community worldwide, then and of course the big thing was what happened in Nazi Germany. So obviously what happens is that when you think of the concentration camps, etc., in Nazi Germany, there is a kind of instinctive emotional revulsion from just thinking of that. And so what they've done is they've linked that instinctive emotional response to the people they're targeting. And this is why calling someone a Holocaust denier is so powerful and impacts so much on people's response. So they say, oh, he's denying the Holocaust, then we've got to silence him. He's a horrible person by definition. So all these things are going on. And, the thing for people to appreciate is that actually the force that's behind the whole Jewish community, and the vast majority of the Jewish community don't know this, actually a network called Sabbateans, also known as Sabbatean Frankists, that go back to the 1600s. You can pick it up there anyway. That actually have contempt for Jewish people, and they've used them mercilessly over the years to get what they want to happen. So, for instance, it was no surprise to me that during COVID, Netanyahu actually bragged in an interview with Jordan Peterson, who sat there kind of touching his capsa, that he'd turned Israel into a lab for Pfizer, the Pfizer fake vaccine. I mean, what contempt you must have for the Israel population to not only do that, but to then brag about it. So this Sabbatean cult, it began with a guy called Sabbatai Zevi in the 1600s who claimed to be the Jewish Messiah. And he operated in the Islamic Ottoman Empire. And eventually he was given a choice by the Sultan of the Ottoman Empire to basically join Islam, become a Muslim, or prove that he's the Jewish Messiah, etc. And he joined Islam. By this time, he'd got a really massive following, compared with the Jewish population worldwide, a massive following. And a lot of them kind of went with him and became Islamic. They became known as the Donma or Donme, which means to turn from Judaism to Islam. But of course, they didn't. And they became this cult, which was in and of itself operating within Islam while infiltrating it. And then along in the next century came this guy who was described by one Jewish historian as one of the most evil people in Jewish history. This is Jacob Frank. And Jacob Frank was connected to the Rothschilds and Mayer Amstel Rothschild and Adam Weishaupt in the creation of the Bavarian Illuminati in 1776. And he took Sabbateanism onto a new level. And the modus operandi of this cult is to infiltrate other religions or other cultures while claiming and posing to be of that religion and of that culture. And they've done a real job on Judaism. And when you look at the creation of Israel, the Rothschilds were absolutely at the center of what happened in the aftermath of World War II. And the leaders of Israel ever since have pretty much been Sabbateans, not Jews, Sabbateans. And so you have this this satanic cult, that's what it is, that was behind the extraordinary violence and tyranny that got 800,000 Palestinians to flee the country, their own country, in the run up to the establishment of Israel in 1948. And some of the with the terrorist groups like Ergun and the Stern Gang and all these others, they did extraordinary violence and terrorism on the Palestinian people, and a lot, vast numbers left. And so Israel was established in 1948, and then came something very significant to your part of the world, I wrote a book called The Trigger about 9/11. The first part takes 9/11 apart, the official story, and the second half of it goes in great detail to who actually was behind it. And fundamentally behind it was Israel and Mossad and that network that comes out of that.
Right.
But the point I'm making here is that once Israel was established in 1948, there's a chapter in the Trigger called Atlantic Crossing, which explains how key Jewish people involved in the creation of Israel were relocated to America so that their children would be born Americans. Of course, one of those families was the Emanuel family of Rahm Emanuel, who was the chief of staff to Obama, actually the handler, also mayor of Chicago, and now the ambassador to Japan. And so after 1948, in the aftermath of the Second World War, a lot of these Sabbateans moved in on America. And one of the things I've done in the books is to go through, for instance, the Obama administration, the Trump administration, and the Biden administration, of how key positions are held by Zionists. And I mean, you look at the Biden administration. Now, the Zionists are the Secretary of State, the Deputy Secretary of State, the head of Homeland Security, the Attorney General, the head of the Treasury, Janet Yellen. And when you look at the ratio of not Sabbatean people, or even tinier, but you look at the ratio of Jewish people to the American population, it's 2.2%. And therefore, the ratio to key positions of power is absolutely fantastic. Now, just to bring it round to basically where we started, the anti-Semitism label is to stop you talking about that, stop you writing about it. You'll don't touch that because you'll get cancelled, you'll get banned. Well, you know, my point has always been that we're far too long along the road to global dystopia for pussyfooting around and thinking, oh, what are the consequences for me of saying this? It's time to say it.
Right.
And what's happening now in current events is that the extreme nature, the extreme psychopathy of the Israeli government has reached the point now where people who before would have said, oh no, you're anti-Semitic, they're going, hold on a minute, what are they doing?
Right. Well, before we move forward, let's this is such an important conversation, and you really excellent job right there of kind of bringing this full circle. But the one point that people may be asking, and this is what I found so fascinating, is this overlap between specifically, again, it's the Sabbatean or how you pronounce it. I've heard it multiple ways, but I'm imagining
different ways of pronouncing it.
And the point being that this is something that we. In my research just today in general, I found an interesting book where it discusses one of the central players in this whole conversation. Cutting to the chase, the point is it makes it very clear that the Sabbateanism they suggested provided Scholem, one of the individuals we're discussing, with a historical and religious blueprint for Zionism. And the overall point being is that some argue that it's in particular that Zionism, communism, and Nazism all stem from that one belief, which is kind of what you're overlapping here. And so it's really
Zionism was the creation of Sabbateanism. It's the Sabbateans that created Zionism.
Exactly.
And you have this connection, this what you call overlap, because this global cult, as I call it, which is an interlocking global web of secret societies, within that web, this Sabbatean cult is very highly significant and very, very powerful within it. And, you know, when you when you listen to that old saying about who controls you by who you can't criticize, well, I mean, that speaks for itself in terms of exposing what's going on. But of course, what they've done is they've had this anti-Semitism response to silence people. But what they've also done in recent years, as you well know, is they've also expanded the definition of anti-Semitism, and they've basically more and more encompassed criticizing Zionism or Israel in general with anti-Semitism. So it's an old trick, and I've experienced it firsthand many times, because this Sabbatean cult is not large in its number, but is very significant in its power. They have in parts of the world where there are very few Jewish people, they have satellite organizations. Of course, you've got the main one, the Anti-Defamation League in America, the ADL, but they have satellite ones. There was one in Australia, or there is one in Australia, and I think they call that the Anti-Defamation Commission or something like that. And that was the real engine room, the driver of getting me banned from Australia a few years ago now. I was sitting in a hotel bar near LAX airport with my son Jamie. We were waiting to get on a flight to start a speaking tour of Australia, having had permission months before from the immigration department. And along came this long, rambling email from the Minister for Immigration at the time, a bloke called David Coleman in Australia, telling me that although I've been to Australia 10 times and speaking there, and there's never been a problem, you're not coming now. And that was because of this this influence of this organization I'm talking about. And then you go to the Netherlands, where I was asked. Actually, one of the prominent people that asked me was a Jewish guy, a friend of mine called Mordecai, to go and speak at a peace rally in the fall of 2022. Just speak for 20 minutes, half an hour, and then I'd go home. And I agreed. And I'm sitting in another hotel bar, this time in Folkestone in England. And the next morning, we're going through the Channel Tunnel to the Netherlands for me to speak, although the furore had already started in the Netherlands by then. And another email came along, actually in Dutch, would you believe? We had to get it translated, telling me that I wasn't coming there either. And that was another one of these satellite organizations that was the driver of that.
I believe they said you were a risk to public order in the Netherlands, which is hilarious because there's not really a crime in there that I can identify.
No, there's not. No, but the thing was that and this is one of the things you see is that what they're looking for all the time. The European Union is a classic example. They're looking for organizations that group countries or group organizations together so that from a central point they can dictate the policy of all those countries and organizations. And so we have the Schengen border group in Europe, where they are all agreed on the same border policy, and they say that if you're banned from one, you're banned from all of them. So for agreeing to speak at a peace rally in Amsterdam, I'm now banned from, I think it's now 29 European countries. And again, it's the same thing. You're anti-Semitic. Well, what does that mean? Well, first of all, like I say, Semitic has a very different meaning to the one they claim it does.
The actual meaning.
But what does that mean? Am I saying that all Jewish people are trying to take the world over? Of course, I'm bloody not. In fact, what I am saying is that the Jewish community in general need to know about this Sabbatean core because they're being played all the time by it. When I first came across it was through a book, two books eventually, by a Jewish rabbi called Marvin S. Antelman. I think he wrote the first book in 1974. That's how long ago. And then there's a big gap before he brought the second one out. And they were called To Eliminate the Opiate. It was a play on Karl Marx's phrase about religion being the opiate of the people. And he had realized that this Sabbatean organization network existed, and what it was doing to the Jewish community. Now it was using it as a front to hide behind, to pursue a very, very not just sinister agenda, but using Jewish people in general as that agenda, as the cover for that agenda. And one of the things that I've seen over the years, because this Sabbatean cult has been controlling Israel from the start. I mean, Netanyahu's absolutely a Sabbatean, and when you talk to people in Israel, I've got a lot of friends in Israel, and they'll tell you, and you can see over time. I saw a brilliant video documentary made by a Jewish guy in Israel about how the indoctrination starts from birth, basically. And I remember on this particular documentary, he was interviewing just a young girl, like, what would she be, 17, 18? And she said to him, we know the rest of the world hates us, and we have to look to our government to protect us. Now, that is the mentality from day one that Jewish people are subjected to. And of course, it has a massive effect. Fear is a very powerful emotion, which can make you do things you wouldn't normally do. And so you look at some of these images that we're seeing of the Israeli Defense Forces and some of their troops, etc., and what they do, and it's like Palestinians are just vermin. I mean, that's the indoctrination that they're put through all through their lives.
And many
so
of them have
that they will do things that are just, to us would be what, but to them it's fine because they're vermin.
And many of them have publicly, repeatedly said as much. I have an interesting question for that exact point is, one of the kind of recurring arguments I've seen, and a lot of Israeli and Jewish individuals making this argument, that exactly what you're saying and exactly what we've been really trying to highlight for people, prominently around, since October 7th, is that the Zionist manipulation is using Judaism, and that a lot of Jews in the world have been slowly coming around to that. And then post October 7th, it was like a slap in the face for a lot of people. And so the question is, was this buildup? And even and if you want to speak on it, the foreknowledge to October 7th, the interesting overlaps to whether false flag or, kind of a lie hop kind of conversation was this allowed or created in order to recreate that justification in the minds of people to say, see, everybody hates you. You need us to exist to protect you. And a lot of Jews and Israelis have argued that was what this was, in order to essentially reestablish that mindset in Jews around the world that Zionism, or specifically the Israeli government, was needed. How do you see that playing in this whole thing?
Well, I think that's 100%. And there's another angle to that as well. What I do in the trigger, or what I did when I was writing the trigger, is I did a tremendous amount of research into the level of surveillance technology and military technology that Israel has. I mean, people don't realize that there is a complex at Beersheba in Israel that is basically akin to Silicon Valley. And they have systematically trawled Israeli schools, universities, for people who are skilled in this whole AI cyberspace technology computerization, etc. And they, of course, have conscription in Israel, and they bring these people in that have these skills, and they put them into Beersheba. They are ostensibly in the Israeli army, but their focus is cyber development and AI development, etc. And these major Silicon Valley corporations, Microsoft and all these others, they all have locations in that Beersheba complex. And it's absolutely massive. And a lot of the you know, when anyone's criticizing Israel on the internet in any way, in the comment sections, a lot of the replies that that come in under different kind of login names are actually coming out of Beersheba, where they're criticizing Israel. And so you have this this conveyor belt, if you like, where they bring people through with these gifts, and then what happens is they suddenly are given startups. I mean, that Beersheba complex is one of the startup capitals of the world in terms of cyber technology and AI. And two things happen. They have startups, and if you noticed, these startup companies, they come out with this kind of groundbreaking technology that advances the ability to surveil and control, and it's like, where did this startup come from? And then you'll see that it's been massively funded from the start. What? And the other thing that they do is they'll send other people who are, in fact, military trained into Silicon Valley to become major players in companies there. Right. And they have this extraordinary technology, surveillance technology, not least. And so when the Hamas attack came, I looked at it immediately, like in seconds, and I thought, this is a scam. You know, you've had former members of the Israeli Defense Forces came out at the time in October and said, look, if a cockroach came close to the fence, we knew about it, or a bird. What? It's impossible for this to happen with the technology that we have. But there were multiple breaches of the fence to allow these Hamas operatives into Israel. And then where was the response from one of the best equipped armies in the world technologically? It wasn't there. So there was many other questions about what followed as well. But beyond question, Ryan, the thing was allowed to happen. So that underpinned, you're absolutely right, that underpinned the feeling of the world hates us or we're in danger. And I've said this over the years so many times, once you get people in fear, they will look outside of themselves for someone or something to protect them from what they've been manipulated to fear. And this is the whole dynamic. But what it's also done is give them the excuse to almost finish the job in a way, because the plan from the start, you know, I have this phrase, know the outcome and you'll see the journey. The outcome all along was planned to be basically the removal of Palestinians from the land we call Israel. And this whole Greater Israel project they talk about, which encompasses other parts of other countries and other countries in totality, some of them. And when you then look at the sequence of events, you know that you can see these maps on the internet just breaking down the different points where the Israeli government controlled more and more and more of the land. And if you look at the current one, with actually basically Palestinians even in the Gaza Strip pushed to the south, and then you see what's left of Palestinian occupation of the West Bank. I mean, they're almost there,
right?
And what this allowing this attack to happen, what it's given them is the excuse to do what they're doing, and because you have so much control, basically total control of the political scene by this global cult, but significant within that is this Sabbatean expression of it. And you have so much control within the political arena that and so much understanding within politics that you don't take this on because there are consequences. Right. That you see the reaction of the presidential candidates when they were running right. in the primaries. They were all pro-Israel. I mean, people like Nikki Haley, of course, she wants to be president of Israel, really. But if you look at Donald Trump, during his period in office, he basically gave Israel everything it wanted. He moved the embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem, which was massively symbolically and more than that significant. His chief advisor, Jared Kushner, was a lifelong friend of Benjamin Netanyahu. His father, Kushner's father, was a close friend of Netanyahu, and his father, of course, was pardoned by Trump at the end of his presidency, instead of people like Julian Assange and Edward Snowden. And then you look at Biden and his administration. You look at Robert Kennedy Jr. Excuse me. These are all massively pro-Israel.
Right. Well, what I think is important is, I think in general is important. The larger point we highlighted there in regard to how, whether we call it Zionism or whatever global cult idea we're talking about, is this not just about Israel or Palestine. It's that you're highlighting the idea that it's this long-term, both religious, but also political kind of infiltration. And I recently just discussed yesterday, being the 30 years after the Rwandan genocide, that turns out that you can very clearly prove using Israeli media and other information that Israel was involved, as well as Bosnia's genocide and any number of other very clear historical genocide. But the interesting thing I pulled out of that was that on the record, there's more than one example of the Israeli government entities highlighting that the reason they were involved with Rwanda from the 60s past 1994 was that they were working their way into the security cabinet because it was benefiting their position with Palestine. And I thought that was so fascinating. And it's kind of the point you're making, is it's this broader global concept. And to bring it back to the point you were just making, is this is something going back to COVID, but it's the point about the current situation in Gaza, the border conversation. And I wrote this then: the undercover of COVID, Israeli government-tied companies justify AI-powered monitoring of Americans. And I wanted to ask you this before we actually bring this into the mainstream alternative media point about the idea of weaponized migration. And it's interesting because this also serves your point you're making in regard to the justification for more surveillance, and then, hey, we got these AI companies set up that just happen to be connected to Unit 8200 that you guys can utilize. And you made a post about this. You said, I keep hearing the bombing of Gaza is good because Israel is the bulwark against Sharia law taking over Europe and the United States. You write, who do you think has been funding and manipulating the open border policies and Middle East wars that have caused the mass migration? And if you want to speak to that for me, because you're mentioning the same point, the Sabbatean Zionist fake Jews, or the cult they're discussing. And so it's interesting to see how Republicans or anybody in the political sphere are being manipulated by these and their political sides. And it's all this kind of problem reaction solution to the same kind of point. So I wanted your thoughts on that.
Yeah, well, I mean, if you read my books over the years, I've been highlighting literally a decade and more that the plan was to bring down the borders into Europe and into the United States so that there would be eventually a massive cultural change in Western countries. And I said in a book some considerable time ago that the plan is that the time will come when people will basically walk across the southern border of the United States without anything to stop them. And George Soros, and this is another thing about George Soros, you see, it's all a mind game. It's not whether something's true or not. And I think Henry Kissinger, another massive Zionist infiltrator, said something like, it's not whether it's true, it's whether people will believe it.
Right.
Because if you can control perception, you control people. And so the perception that George Soros has tried to sell is that he's kind of anti-Zionist, that he's not really one of those Israel people. But actually he is. He's on the team. The whole Open Society Foundation network is serving the Sabbatean agenda to transform the cultural nature of the West. And to do that, you have to open the borders and let other cultures pour in. And you've only got to look at all over the world, all over the Western world, where governments are giving financial incentives and other incentives for people to come in. And this has happened in Europe, and it's happened in America and in Canada as well. And so we're looking actually at a cultural takeover. Now, people should follow whatever culture they want and whatever religion they want. But the question is, in terms of Western countries, why is this happening? We can see what's happening when you can, if you've got a brain cell on active duty, but why is it happening? And this is happening to dismantle what we call the West. And you can see this in, again, from what we talked about earlier, who you can criticize. You can say what you like about white people, and it's not a problem. No problem with political correctness, none of it. But say anything about other cultures coming in to Western countries, you are a racist and all the other demonization labels that we see. I'm not a Christian. I don't follow any religion. But if you look at the development of the Western society, Western countries, it is intrinsically connected to Christianity. And so if you want to dismantle Western society and the kind of pillars that hold it together, then you're going to not just target white people, because they are the biggest racial group in the West that you want to transform and you want to bring under submission. You want to target Christianity as well. So same thing. You can say what you bloody like about Christianity, no problem. Right. But you criticize other religions, and it is a problem. It's a big problem. You're a racist, or you're Islamophobic, or whatever.
And if I can interject one quick point, it's just, remember, we can see clearly that foreign policy of both the U.S. government and Israel, if you really look at what they're doing, historically has targeted Christian populations and Christian locations, and the Christian populations in Syria and so on. So it's hard, and even though the argument is it was about protecting those things and going after the other side of that coin, so it's interesting to see that. So please continue.
Yeah, I mean, like I say, I don't follow a religion, but what I do is respect others having the right to follow whatever they choose to follow. My only problem that when I get interested is if what others believe is being imposed on other people. That's the problem. Not what people believe. Is when you're trying to impose what you believe on other people.
Exactly.
But it's clear that there is a massive cultural change taking place, And another indicator of the background is that we're being sold the idea that we must let unlimited, basically, numbers of people to come into Western countries because they're fleeing war and deprivation, and they're just families with children. But, you know, we have a situation now in Britain where the big dingers are coming across the channel from France in greater and greater numbers. And they are then put up in accommodation, which is denied many people from Britain that are sleeping in the bloody streets every night, by the way. Same in other countries as well. And the numbers are getting greater and greater. And it's not families with children. There are one or two, but it's not overwhelmingly them. It's young adult men. That's who's coming. I mean, you've only got to watch the dinghies coming in, and look at the pictures of the flood across the southern border of the United States. They're overwhelmingly young adult men. Now,
I think what's
why is that? Why is that? And the other point about Britain is they're fleeing war and they're fleeing all this. They're coming in from France. That's where they're coming from, France. So it's all a scam, and it's to get the wokers, you know, to say, oh no, we must look after these people, because you know, wokery is another word for naivety, and what we've seen in places like Sweden, which was a very, very woke country before woke was invented, a very nice country. I mean, I used to love going there, but I've been there since the big influx into Sweden, and it's unbelievable. It's not Sweden anymore. It's not that country anymore that I used to go to speak in various things in Stockholm. And what you've seen, I've seen people interviewed, I've seen people quoted, is that people that were absolutely up for opening the doors because they're fleeing war and all this stuff, we must be kind and let them in. They're now seeing the consequences of that with Sharia police telling them how long their skirt has to be. So it's but once it's happened, of course, it's a done deal. You know, you're past the point of no return. And this is not an attack on people's religion, or it's not an attack on people's color. It's not an attack on any of that. It's basically looking at the reality and the outcome of what's going on. And what I'm seeing more and more of are people who are saying that Islam is going to take over. You know, we have more babies than you do. We're gonna take over. There'll be Sharia law, and of course the great majority are not saying that. But the fact that some are saying that, and the numbers are saying it are increasing, is an indication of where this is meant to go. And then you look at
if I can interject really quickly, because there's a lot of points I want to make about that. This is really, really important right now to the larger, a lot of topics. Now, I think what's important, and I agree with 99% of what you're saying there, I think what's important is, you know, there is weaponized migration, immigration. I think the people that deny that are just willfully ignorant. It's very clear historically. But what concerns me about all this is clear, as you said, there are some refugees. There are people, and I'm not sure what number or percentage that would be, but clearly there are people that are fleeing belligerent foreign policy of our governments. But at the same time, as you're saying, it's very easy to see that there is still some, whatever percentage you want to discuss, I don't know, part of it that is weaponized migration. And as you said, it's self-evident in many cases. And so what I worry about is that we can see, and as you're highlighting here, is this is stemming from a Zionist manipulation. but it is still real in that sense. But then you've got the political dynamic in the United States where largely the right side, or even, either side, it's Russia or it's China, no one's highlighting what you argue is the real issue here. And so it continues the problem without really addressing it, but it's confusing. But at the same time, it's the same dynamic we're seeing, and you can see where it stems from, where Israel's main point is that the Palestinian, and even the overlap with the Rwanda point and why they align, because, well, you see the same thing. You've got a refugee problem, even though it's not really what it was, whether it was the Tutsis or the Palestinians, they were originally from the land they were moved from, right? So they're simply trying to come back. And so my point is, Israel is turning this mentality around to the world and saying, something that they seem to be driving and creating, when it's really it's creating the mentality of other people in the world that it's all or nothing, as opposed to where there are some refugees. Like, I guess my point is, if you allow unfettered migration, that's chaos in any sense, whether it's people from that country or other countries. An influx to that number is going to cause chaos. So it's not about race or racism in that sense, but there is an element of that that's being pushed over the top of it. And it's being, you see where I'm going with this, right? And I think the problem is that from the American perspective at the border, to bring that home to Americans in particular, is the whole weaponized migration aspect is not China in what we're discussing. It's largely coming from the Zionist agenda. So how do we correctly highlight that, both while still concerning ourselves with the real people that are mixed up in that, and then also the weaponized aspect of it, especially while our political dynamic is aiming at China instead of highlighting the real problem? You see what I'm saying? It's a real difficult dynamic there.
Yeah, well, people just have to have the guts to say what they see, instead of keeping their head down in fear of the consequences. If people go onto the internet, there was a lady. She was the wife. She was American born. She was the wife of a rabbi, and they moved to Sweden. And this is some time ago now, and she is being interviewed, and she says that Europe is going to have to learn to be multicultural, and we Jews are not going to be very popular. Basically, I'm paraphrasing her, because we are going to be very much involved in that multiculturalization of Europe. And the arrogance that is necessary to summon to say that, what about the people of Europe? Can they ever say that? But what she was articulating, and you can still see it on the internet, was actually what is happening. Because if you have an agenda, and it's all about what's the outcome. Okay, I can see the journey now. The outcome, on one level, is a global government, a world government, ultimately without any elected officials. They're just appointed, technocracy, and no countries. Now, the biggest bulwark against that, the biggest point of resistance against getting rid of countries, is to have a sense of nationhood. It's to have a sense of what your nation is. And there were, I'm now coming up 72. I remember Europe as it was before, where you went to France, you knew you were in France. You went to Belgium, you knew you were in Belgium. Netherlands, you knew in the Netherlands. Everywhere. You were in Britain, you knew you were in Britain. And I've watched that over the decades of my life, be, especially in recent times, be diluted and diluted to the point where you don't have this same sense of nationhood anymore. You don't have this sense of what that your nation represents. And this is all diluting resistance to getting rid of nations altogether. It's the whole point.
You know what's really strange is when I traveled through Europe, and I believe this would have been like 2001, 2002, backpacked. At that time, as you probably remember, there was no, once you're in Europe, you could travel freely across borders within countries. And so what's strange to me is that at a time when that was the case, you're highlighting that it was more unique. And yet as these things get more strict and borders become more controlled, it seems to be getting more the opposite. How do you make sense of that? I mean, really, it makes sense of the fact that it's a weaponized dynamic. That's the only way to make sense of that.
The whole point, the European Union was an absolutely, I've kind of, I've documented this in great detail over decades, how the European Union came about. It's completely a cult operation, because again, as we talked about earlier, if you look at the way that history has unfolded, we used to organize ourselves a long time ago in a tribal situation, and people in the tribe decided what the tribe was going to do. Then we had this massive change when lots of tribes were brought together to form what we call nations. Now, someone at the center of the nation is dictating to all the former tribes that form that nation. And then you go into the European Union and you take it onto an even greater level, just one step from world government, whereby from a central point, unelected bureaucrats in Brussels are dictating to the entirety of the European Union. And so this whole European Union policy, in all its spectrum of policies over its existence, have all been pushing this cult agenda. And fundamental was bringing down the borders, not least in the context that we're talking about. It means that if you can cross the outer border of Europe, you can then go where you bloody like. You know, people like Hungary have pushed back on this, but most of Europe has succumbed to it. And so, you know, as was happening in Britain now, people are starting to, in greater and greater and greater numbers, come to Britain across the English Channel from France because they can, it's transforming Western society. And you know, if we would have integration, then and respect, and a lot of migrants do, but a significant number don't, for the culture of the host nation. Then we'd get on a lot better. But it's not about that. It's about imposing your culture upon the culture that you've entered.
Well, but how much of that do you think is the deliberate, like not just the deliberate migration of like forcing people, that alone is a weaponized idea, but how much do you think of this is the internal surreptitious, like you're highlighting, all military age male concept coming from, as we're talking about a Zionist kind of manipulation, weaponized migration? How much of this is deliberately seeding this with people that then go in to deliberately cause chaos, as opposed to just being there and disrupting the systems?
Well, I think there's a lot of that going on, and you not only see this endless now stream of young adult men coming into Western countries from other cultures, but like I said earlier, you've got all the financial incentives for them to do so, and if you go back, because it is like a, you know, this cult agenda is it is like dominoes going all around the room. They know if you push the first domino, it's gonna hit the second domino, and it's going to activate the third and the fourth, and so it goes on. So if you go back to pre 9/11 and this project for the New American Century, where they listed in September 2000 all the countries in the Middle East that they wanted to target, Syria and Iraq and Libya and all the rest of them, which they have picked off as best they can, not least Iraq, and Iran, leading to Iran as well. They knew that was a domino. It was a domino in many ways, but one of the dominoes was, if you cause absolute chaos and catastrophe in these Middle Eastern countries, I mean, look what's happened in Libya. It's you know, whatever you say about Gaddafi, it was a country that had some organization to it. Now it's a basket case.
Right.
What's going to happen? Well, you know that large numbers of people, genuine people to start with, absolutely fleeing horror, are going to leave. They're going to try to leave. And then you say to yourself, are they going to go south into Africa? No, they're going to go north into Europe. You know that. And so that was the trigger to start the whole thing happening, the whole flow happening. And then once you've got that movement initially of genuine people, and I have no problem with taking in people who are fleeing war and genuine horrors, absolutely not. But that was the start. And then organizations like the Soros Open Society Foundation started tagging more and more people on the end of that, and using that as a way to add and add and add to the numbers with people that weren't fleeing war and what have you, and the numbers just got bigger and bigger and bigger. And one of the big kind of red flags, flashing red lights, actually, was Angela Merkel, then Chancellor of Germany, who is a global cult to her DNA, by the way, who just opened the doors of Germany to 1 million migrants moving in, just like that. And of course,
I just want to say, even again, even if these were all refugees fleeing war, even that is dangerous. Like, I don't mean as the individuals, like this is what's important for that people go all the way on one side or the other. The reality is usually in the middle, is that even honest, genuine refugees seeking need or seeking, shelter and so on will destabilize a country if led in enough numbers, even if done the right way. Like, that's just a basic reality. And so then you include weaponized individuals within that. I mean, it's a guarantee, in my opinion, that what you're seeing was going to happen.
Yeah, because what the plan has been is to destabilize the West, destabilize Western countries. And if you can open the door to other cultures in that level of number,
right,
that we've now reached, then you're going to sow chaos, and you're going to sow discord. Because what is more and more happening is even some of the early wokers, like I said earlier, they are starting to see the consequences. Because, this is the point. If you don't have borders, you don't have countries, because you cannot legislate and you cannot organize like payments for people who are in need of help, and all these other things that government's supposed to do, and all the financial implications of all that. You cannot legislate and plan for that when the borders are open and more people are pouring in. Right. So what happens is the indigenous populations start to suffer and suffer and suffer from the impact of the numbers. And what we're seeing in Britain, like I mentioned earlier, we've got a big homeless problem in Britain, as other countries have, not least America, my goodness. But they're still sleeping in the street while migrants are coming in and being given hotel rooms. Now, first of all, if they can be given hotel rooms, why weren't the homeless given hotel rooms? But oh no, we can't afford that. Well, suddenly you can, because it's systematic, and if you are in a country or a situation that is not very nice and is very challenging, and from the experience of people who've gone before, that if you can get to this a Western country like Britain or America, once you're in, you're going to have all the things basically given to you that you don't have now. Then who wouldn't head for Europe, right? So I'm not condemning those people for wanting to do that, although in the end they're going to have the consequences as well, because of the chaos, upheaval, and deprivation that will come from the numbers ever increasing. But it's the governments of those countries that are not taking action to stop it, but are taking action to encourage it.
And an interesting byproduct of that is ultimately bringing it all together, is that so you have the same destabilization, and the governments that have allowed it, and the indigenous population that then resents that, feeling like they're not being taken care of, which they, in a degree, they aren't. And then they feel unsettled with the current power structure, which then you have the same point from the Zionist infiltration that is seeding who they want to be in control. And so then all of a sudden you have this dynamic that allows them to potentially put people in power that are then more in line with what they want to happen. It seems like this continually self-fulfilling prophecy, right? Where you are creating the dynamics to create what you want.
Yeah. And of course, as the indigenous population see their culture disappearing, and we have reached the point now where that's happening. Really, I mean, you've only got to go on the internet and see the increasing numbers of people are saying, what the hell happening to the country that I knew? Then you're going to have conflict. And of course, you know, there's a heck of a lot of adult young men that are in the country to be part of that conflict. And so that's absolutely what's planned to be part of it is conflict between the populations. And you know, if you want to destabilize a country or any other situation, you want chaos. You want upheaval. What's the 33rd degree of Freemasonry's motto? Ordo ab chaos, order out of chaos. Create the chaos and then offer the order out of it, which is your order, transforming a society into the way that you want it to be. And in terms of politics, like I said earlier, the plan is to have a technocracy where people are appointed rather than, like the bureaucrats of Brussels are appointed, not elected by the people, and to bring an end to elected politicians. So if you want that, you have to discredit politicians in the mind of the population. And the more you create chaos and the more that you arrange for moronic people to enter politics and moronic people to be president and prime minister. I mean, you know, we've got a weak man here called Rishi Sunak, who's prime minister, and waiting to come in is another weak man who's a member of the Trilateral Commission, Keir Starmer. In America, if you want to break the spirit of America and a sense of America and being American, then put someone who's clearly senile in the presidency, because what that's saying is we can put who we hell we like in the White House. Look who we put in now. Oh, and by the way, look at the people in his administration, and so you're discrediting the elected politician in the minds of the population, because what you're looking for is a response of, well, honestly, well, look what the politicians have done. Look at it. You know, let's try something else. And that's, you know, it's because it's all perception. When there's a few of you and you're trying to control the many, you can't. Well, they're trying to get to a point through AI control of the human brain where they can do that. But before they get to that point, you can't control people physically on the scale of 8 billion people. So you have to control them by controlling their perception, which controls their behavior. You want them to behave as you want by perceiving as you want. And so this cult in its inner core, where it's all coming from, they are absolutely masters, experts at manipulating perception to get people to see something the way that suits them.
And I think that's a beautiful transition to the final part of what I want to discuss, which is mainstream alternative media and the idea of, you know, social engineering, propaganda, and just the idea of how these things are absolutely influencing, and I argue right now, controlling our perception to a degree I've never seen before. And I wanted to overlap this with what you were just highlighting, is this, you know, something Whitney Webb, who's a writer for TLAV as well, has continued to highlight for a very long time, is the startups, right? The idea of the Unit 8200 tied companies. And I just think it's hilarious that we can show that a one of those companies runs Twitter verification, which I just think is sort of on the nose and ridiculous. So
Absolutely.
let's talk about that very point. And you really have kind of coined this mainstream alternative media point. And you discussed this. We really are highlighting Elon Musk, which is the technocratic side of this, the AI influence, everything you're highlighting there. But you've also gone over people like Alex Jones, Tucker Carlson, Andrew Tate, Peterson, Shapiro, and a lot of them. So let's talk about this to wrap up today in general. And how serious is this truly? And to what degree do you think this is controlling the conversation? And just kind of go into the idea of mainstream alternative media as it pertains to what we were talking about today.
Well, I think it's very serious, and I wouldn't go on and on about it if I didn't think so. I'm in my 35th year of uncovering this, and so I go back to 1990, and there was no alternative media when I started out. There was just a few disparate individuals trying to put out what they could. And there was no internet. If you had a meeting, you had to stand in the street and hand leaflets out. That's how it started. And so I watched the alternative media appear, and I was delighted because it was a lonely place before. It's still a lonely place now if you have your own opinion and not groupthink. But
right.
It was great. And one of the things that was kind of accepted in those days was that countries were one-party states. That started to sink in. It's like the old phrase, it doesn't matter who you vote for, the government still gets in.
Right.
Yeah, the cult government.
Right.
And that's absolutely vital. What I've seen since COVID, and what COVID did is it showed the influence of the alternative media as it was then.
Right.
And so here's a question. If there is a network of people that are exposing what you're doing and you don't want to be exposed, are you going to leave them to it? No.
Right.
You reach the point with COVID because there is this this challenge they have that the more they push towards the end goal, the more people are going to go, what's happening? What's going on? Mm-hmm. So you're going to get that. You have to deal with that. So COVID, of course, was a big wake-up call for a lot of people. And the longer it went on, we saw the real consequences of the fake vaccine, which, of course, some of us were calling out at the time. Right. Then you had more and more people waking up. Now, that genie is not going back. So what you need to do is control it. And you need to control where it goes and control how much it knows. So what you're really looking for is to focus attention on the myopia of the cult agenda, on the symptoms, and not see the cause. You don't want to go there. So what you really want is, okay, what I call here and no further. So keep it to politics. Keep it to Biden, Trump, and what have you. Keep it to name, states, places, 5 cents level of everything, and keep it as tight as you can. And what I've seen, Ryan, since COVID, is people coming in that weren't there before. Mm-hmm. That didn't call COVID. A lot of them didn't call COVID, a lot of them, but actually bought it. And now people like Brett Weinstein. Brett Weinstein, his brother Eric Weinstein, is a business associate of Peter Thiel, who is intelligence and Pentagon to his DNA again. And this guy, Ramaswamy, who ran for president, is a business associate of Peter Thiel. And Thiel keeps coming up again and again as I'm looking at connections within significant parts of this, what I call mainstream alternative media, because what's happened is there is now a mainstream level of the alternative media, which is focused overwhelmingly on the myopia of the symptoms. So you have someone like Brett Weinstein. You can see the video on the internet where during COVID, he's being interviewed about his thoughts on it. And of course, he bought the whole bloody thing. And he's got a scarf around his neck, like a bandana around his neck, red. And he tells the lady who's interviewing him that he, once COVID started and he was told about COVID, he bought 25 of them on Amazon, these things. He says, and what I do, he says, I have it around my neck all day, because then if I have to answer the door, it's easy just to pull it up over my face, right? He then says that when he goes out, he puts on safety glasses, stop the virus getting into through his eyes, and he wears gloves. So then, well, that's fair enough. He's bought it. Okay, fine. All right. Lots of people did. But then he's interviewed by Tucker Carlson as our go-to man on bloody COVID.
I know.
A few days later, he's gone down to the border, the southern border. Now he's an expert on that, and he's come back and been interviewed by Carlson again on what's happening in the southern border.
Interesting way to tie a lot of these things together today. I think that's interesting. The border, the same thing. Like there's a central play in all this. Go ahead. I just think that's fascinating.
There is a central play in all this, and in terms of the border, you can take it down to Peter Thiel again, and a close associate of Peter Thiel called Palmer Luckey, who runs an operation that is seeking to have an AI border, a southern border, not a wall. And if you want to stop people coming in, build a bloody wall from sea to sea, right, and police it. Okay, done. No, now it's we don't want AI and biometrics, which you can switch off when you want to let people in, but right. and then we can set that precedent for doing it, inland, and you've got the European Union now that are introducing biometrics and all that stuff at airports, and so then you have Donald Trump. Of course, Peter Thiel was on Trump's transition team in 2016 when he won the election, and Trump's now making speeches saying, "Yes, we're not we're going to build a wall anymore. We're going to have an AI biometric system that's going to keep people out." So you've got a lovely problem reaction solution there, because what you're after, it's all psychological. What you're after is the pushbackers. You've got the wokers. You've got all those other people that just nod and say, believe whatever they're told. Right. But you've got the pushbackers, and the pushbackers in the United States are overwhelmingly Trump supporters. So you're after them, and that over the years, that whole arena, not least the alternative media, has been pushing back on biometrics and AI borders and all these other things. What you want is to get them on board with it by highlighting a problem. I mean, Musk is tweeting all the time about the southern border. Right. Sorry, where did that come from? Suddenly, your machine gun firing about the southern border. You have a word with Brett Weinstein, and so. You got this. Oh yeah, we got to do something about the southern border. Well, we tech billionaires have the answer. I mean, Whitney Webb's been highlighting this brilliantly, right? And that's what's going on. And so that targeting of that pushbacker arena, it will bring us to Elon Musk. You see, I was tracking Elon Musk long ago, years and years and years and years ago, because he kept being involved in companies that were blatantly advancing the agenda of the cult. not least SpaceX putting up low orbit satellites, firing the cloud at eventually every inch of the Earth, which is what they want. And he's tweeting every week now, bragging about new Starlink Wi-Fi systems going up to in low orbit satellites. And this is the point I'm making, Ryan, is those that were normally before pushing back on it are now, yeah, Elon, right? They're cheering that he's putting Starlink satellites up to beam the cloud at us. The cloud that people like Ray Kurzweil say, the Google executive, is meant to be to be connected to the human brain,
right?
And at the same time that he's doing that, he's pushing the autonomous car agenda with Tesla. He's just announced, absolutely off the cult World Economic Forum script, that in August he's going to launch the Tesla autonomous taxi. That's exactly in line with what the plan is. He's connecting the brain to artificial intelligence and computers with Neuralink. That's well back off the cutting edge, but his main role is sales pitching the agenda while claiming to oppose it. And the difference between the alternative media that was pointing these things out in terms of Musk and the mainstream alternative media now that is on its knees to Musk is the purchase of Twitter. So, you know, this is the point. I know you've been in this arena a long time. When you've put the hours in and you've put the years in and you've put the decades in, you get to understand a lot of things, and you get to understand the detail of this agenda and how it works and how it manipulates perception to get its way. If you come into this arena after COVID, either because you sent in there because that's the job that you're going to do, but overwhelmingly you've come in because you've seen COVID was a scam, and you haven't put those years in and decades in before, then you are suffering from a lack of knowledge, a lack of experience in how this all works. So I'm hearing people like Brett Weinstein saying, well, this is happening, but I don't know why. What do you mean you don't know why? Read my books from 20 years ago.
Right.
And so with Elon Musk, he buys Twitter, right? Let me have a quick drink. He buys Twitter, and he claims that he's a free speech absolutist. Okay. And people say, well, that's fantastic, because he's bought Twitter, and Twitter before, they were banning anyone who said anything. They completely controlled what was posted. Right. And then he buys it and he releases the Twitter files, which are revealing, oh yeah, the deep state controlled Twitter and what was posted. Why did they sell it him then?
Right.
That's the question I've been asking ever since, that's not been answered. Here's a man says, I'm a free speech absolutist. He's not. And the deep state that wants to control the narrative, that wants to control what he said and not said on Twitter and everywhere else, has control of Twitter, and he's doing that, then decides to sell it to Elon Musk. And this is where the experience comes in, because I've been tracking Elon Musk for years and years and years before he bought Twitter. And so the moment that deal happened, I thought, this is a scam. So why is it a scam? Well, you've only got to see the impact on the mainstream alternative media, which parts of it are incredibly naive, and see everything in and of itself in black and white instead of seeing the subtleties, to see the impact of him buying Twitter. Because all the calling out of what he was doing with SpaceX and Tesla and Neuralink, it's all stopped within the mainstream alternative media, because now he's a god. And there was a Dutch activist called, there is a Dutch activist called Eva van Dingerbroek. And I saw her video she did in, I think it was 2021, something like that, in which she was calling out Elon Musk for being a vehicle for transhumanism and the AI agenda. Absolutely right. Round of applause.
Right.
Now, just like a lovesick teenager over Elon Musk. And the only difference is he's bought Twitter and X. And what he's doing is, and of course, if you are really a free speech absolutist and against the World Economic Forum agenda, you don't bring in Linda Yaccarino, a stalwart of the World Economic Forum, to be your CEO. I mean, you just don't do it. But what she said after she took the job was this phrase about freedom of speech and freedom of reach. You'll be able to say it, well, to an extent, but not many people are going to see it if what you say is lawful but awful. Okay, so it's lawful, but it's awful. Who decides if it's awful? Oh, we do. And I know from my own experience on Twitter, because you know the number of people following my page goes up and up and up and up and up. It's gone up well over 100,000 since like October. But that's not reflected in the number of people that see the posts. And I get people, they contact me and they say, I'm not getting your post. I don't get your post. I have to go to your page to see it. And yet you look at the mainstream alternative media characters who are in this here and no further barricade brigade, as I call them, and they get really big numbers. They're heavily promoted, very supported by the algorithms. And there's another thing, because the algorithms support more than anyone else on Twitter, obviously, Elon Musk, he can post the most inane bloody post, even if he actually does most of them, and he'll get millions and millions and millions of views. So what he does is with a retweet, it might be an inane comment, often is, but whoever is retweeting is going to go off the back of those millions and millions and millions of views. And you see how he's targeting mainstream alternative media people to boost their profile by retweeting them.
Many of which are very like demonstrably sharing false information. And I don't mean like debatable false, like things that later turn out to be false. And yet, well, for example, there are people that have blocked me, so I blocked them in return, that still literally pop up on my Twitter feed as like a notification. I look at it, I'm blocked. But that's Twitter, even though we're blocked, pushing that in front of us. Like, it just shows you there's a deliberate effort to highlight these people, not even just algorithmically. I think that's about like highlighting certain people despite the information being right or wrong. And even I'll add as well, the Twitter files aspect of that, I thought was one of the most primary aspects of how this was meant to work, which it redefined in many people's minds the way journalism was supposed to work, right? Remember, we never saw source material. Despite all the promises that the source material would come, we got screenshots and then resting on the reputation of specific people that posted it. And that was it. And so and I agree, most of what they showed was actually true, but I think it was about trying to reestablish that we never really needed to prove it, you know, and now we've seen a lot of that trickle through the mainstream alternative media with a lot of subjective conjecture and, you know, and manipulation.
Yeah. I mean, Joe Rogan, who's kind of a Elon Musk groupie, really, when Musk went on to talk about the Twitter files, not once did Rogan say, "Well, why would they have sold you to Twitter,
right,
if they already controlled it?" It's an obvious question for a proper journalist, but
right.
he never asked it. Of course he doesn't, and none of these people do. And it's a psyop. I think Trump's a psyop, and I think absolutely that Elon Musk is a psyop. And it's sad and tragic how easy that people who think they're streetwise can buy this stuff.
Yeah.
And this is another point which is kind of very topical today, actually, as we speak. One of the points I've been making over the period since Musk bought Twitter, or actually that's another point. Of course,
Right.
Twitter's owned by X Corp, but the parent company of Twitter is X Holdings Corporation, which the MAM god Musk pressured a judge to not have the investors, about 96, I think, of X Holdings Corporation to be revealed, because some former employees of Twitter who were fired by Musk, they went to court for compensation, and they wanted the names of the X Holdings Corporation investors revealed to them. And the judge agreed that their lawyer could see it, but it mustn't be made public. So we still don't know. But in theory, he kind of owns it. But he has the kudos now with the mainstream alternative media, to the point where they're not questioning the things that he's doing, which are not only through his companies advancing the cult agenda, but through his comments. I mean, he's been calling for years, and did just a couple of weeks ago, maybe a bit more, for a carbon tax and all these things. There's a Musk kind of charity fund or whatever that's put up a prize of millions and millions of dollars for someone to come up with technology that can take carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere, a la Bill Gates. So all these things are just ignored because he's bought Twitter X. And it's not just me that's being shadow banned. I mean, loads of people are being shadow banned, but they're not the mainstream alternative media. They get the promotion.
Right. Well, I think this is an excellent place to put a pin in. And there's so many things we could talk about around this, but I think this is it's highlighted a lot of important dynamics that, again, are easily verifiable if people take the time to look into your work and the source material we will include. But it's such a problematic cycle to see how all this connects, and to see how the perception of the things we're trying to highlight are in real time being distorted because of the control of what we just highlighted at the end here, and how all this ties back to, much bigger, longer lasting issues that go across multiple countries, multiple atrocities throughout history. And I think it's important that people don't shy away, as you were saying earlier, from acknowledging these truths, because we can prove them, just because of flimsy and baseless allegations of racism that are truly losing their power today. So I'd like to go ahead. Final comments.
I was just going to say that I said a few minutes ago that there's something topical going on now, which I just wanted to mention. Mm-hmm. I've been saying over the months since he bought Twitter that he has a getaway car in the background, and that is government legislation. The European Union is absolutely seeking to target the content of Twitter X. And we've got this thing running in Brazil, where they've banned some people that were posting on X, obviously through their Supreme Court for political reasons. And Musk, as we speak, is saying he's going to push back on that. But that's in the background, which will allow the kudos of Elon Musk in the mainstream alternative media to continue even through censoring people. Because if you have these government legislations, these laws saying that, as the Brazilians are saying, we're going to fine you so much a day while you allow these people on, then there comes a point where you can say, look, we can't cope with this. We've got to kind of, comply with this. And people go, well, it's not Elon's fault. He didn't want to do this, but of course he's got to do it because of all that stuff. And the point is that these laws have been known about for a long time, way before he bought Twitter. We knew that these laws were coming. So from that point of view, you have a getaway car, like I say, whereby you can say, I don't want to do it, but I basically got no choice. But the outcome is the same. This is a point that I would strongly make. You've got your Musks and you've got your Teals and you've got your Googles and your open AIs with Sam Altman. And they appear to be in competition with these AI systems like Grok at X and Gemini at Google and AI GPT at OpenAI. And they're in competition, right? And this is one of the great ways they scam people's perception, because, okay, they're in competition. Oh, yeah. So what's the outcome? The outcome is the technology, whatever you bloody call it, expands and expands and expands. That's the outcome, is that AI takes over. Never mind the competition. That's just to keep you in the belief that there's some kind of competition going on. Actually, if you go deep enough into Musk, deep enough into Google, deep enough into OpenAI, deep enough into Amazon, deep enough into Sam Altman, you'll see the same source and the same force. And it's all a perceptual scam. And we need to get streetwise to it.
I 100% agree. And I think that the interesting overlap to all of this is why this is so concerning, because it's not just as simple as one individual and their agenda. There's a much more surreptitious dynamic here. And I think that what you highlighted for people, at the very least, if they want to see it, have given them more than enough to understand this and a starting point to continue to look further. I'll highly recommend your work, your books, your website. I'll include the links down below. If you, to end in general, would you like to shout out the upcoming work you had, the book you said you were working on? And I'd love to reconnect with you in the future. There's probably 45 other topics we could talk about for another 2 hours.
Yeah, I mean, there's so much to talk about. And that's the point, really, is how the mainstream alternative media has created this myopia of topics they talk about now. And I remember when the alternative media, and of course the real alternative media that doesn't get the focus and attention, people like you and so many others, they're still doing it. I'm talking about that which gets the attention, where all the focus is on. They have been before the alternative media was bringing new things to the table all the time. Like Whitney Webb's brought new things to the table in the last few weeks and what have you. But the mainstream alternative media doesn't bring new things to the table. It just regurgitates the same old stuff. And I see, blockbuster, bombshell. And I'm thinking that was in my books 20 years ago, man.
Right.
they're basically regurgitating the same stuff, which is not a problem for the cult because that stuff's out there anyway. That's another big red flag for me, is how little new stuff is being brought to the table. It is by proper alternative journalists, but not by the mainstream.
Right. Yeah. Well said. Well, thank you for
So
joining.
my book is the third point in a trilogy, which started off with the trap, then it's gone to the dream, which is the one now, and then what's coming out is a book called The Reveal, which is the third point of the trilogy, which goes seriously deep in the rabbit hole. I think probably further than ever before, and light years deeper than the mainstream alternative media will ever go.
Right.
Yeah. So I'm very, very pleased with it. I just finished it today, funnily enough.
Outstanding. Well, I'm looking forward to checking it out, David. And it's been a pleasure talking with you. I hope people will check out your work. And as I said, I'll include the links down below. And as always, everybody out there, question everything, come to your own conclusions. Stay vigilant.
Slaughter in Gaza has nothing to do with a conflict between religions, between Judaism and Islam. We have been living together as Jews and Muslims for literally hundreds of years. Thousands of years we've been living together with Arab people. You can see how we live together. It's only an introduction of a political movement called Zionism, and that's using the name of Judaism to declare war on the people of Palestine, to declare and vilify the people of Palestine, that they're anti-Semites, anti-Jews. That's totally repugnant and false. We